It's not your lucky day. I'm in a rotten mood.
It seems like we're always in this situation.
You're all wrong! Wrong!
And every time I'm proven right, I'll abuse that edge clip. I literally said when the Trails in the Sky First Chapter remake was announced last year that we'd see them remake the second chapter pretty soon after. So...
Tell me when I'm telling lies!
And let's get into it. During the overnight hours between August 31st and September 1st, Nihon Falcom's president Toshihiro Kondo appeared in an interview with Automaton. I would say it's one of his most candid interviews to date, since the man will say one thing distorting the truth, then actually saying the quiet part out loud later on. When the first remake was initially announced, he said the second and future games would only be remade if fan demand was high enough. Clearly, he has to say this for very obvious reasons. He'd essentially be shooting the remake's chances of decent sales early on by saying, yes, we will be remaking the rest of the Liberal trilogy. With this admittedly very short interview, he did end up saying the quiet part out loud. We don't even have the first Sky remake for another 18 days at the time of recording, so either the pre-order figures are so outstanding Falcom now feels the need to reveal, oh hey, the second chapter is coming. It was also rather telling when you look at Kondo's wording, where he explicitly said a standalone remake of the first game makes no sense without second chapter. This was literally something I said last year when I talked about this very topic. Yet I'm the illogical liar. Yeah, okay.
Go fuck yourself.
While Kondo has stated future remakes will depend on fan demand, logically it only makes sense if we're getting the first 5 games remade. Think about it. The first 2 Sky games have a lot of unanswered questions by the time the second game wraps up. The third game answers those questions and establishes new ones, only answered in the Crossbell duology, which then further sets up more storylines that either wrap up with the events for Trails into Reverie, or have yet to be wrapped up fully come the events of Trails Beyond the Horizon. This pretty much tells us Sky 3rd Chapter will be remade and probably sooner than people think when you consider Falcom Games literally reuse assets to make the production of games not just more cost efficient, but also requiring less overall work to get a project over the finish line. It's why we have at minimum 1 new Falcom release per year, sometimes multiple. Kondo also said something else in that interview which I think warrants its own segment for this video, so let's break that down really quickly. In 2024, Trails Beyond the Horizon, otherwise known as Kai no Kiseki, released in Japan. We're getting it early next year. So, come September of next year, if that game doesn't have a resolution, it'll have been 3 years with a cliffhanger that is supposedly pretty massive. Now in the aforementioned interview, Kondo stated the conclusion to that cliffhanger will only get resolved based on how much fan demand there is. Logically speaking, they're going to need to wrap that cliffhanger up sooner rather than later, especially when you consider Trails is still one of Falcom's pillar franchises. In fact, I would argue it's more of a pillar than their other flagship title, Ys. That's not a knock on Ys, it's just a matter of fact. For whatever reason, more people are invested in the franchise that's actually harder to get into. It doesn't really make sense, but whatever. But apparently Kai no Kiseki 2 entered production at the same time the first Sky remake did, which makes sense when you consider how Falcom conducts their business. But with how I conduct my business, I have to ask you to smash that subscribe button like you want to spear it through a goddamn table. But I have to point out a flaw in Kondo's statement. Of course, there's bloody fan demand for the sequel to Trails Beyond the Horizon. My friends who are ahead of me in the series are constantly yammering away about how damned exciting the story gets. When you have as rabid a fanbase as the Trails community, they are of course going to demand the sequels as soon as they can get them. Leaving fans on a cliffhanger for 2 years is pretty much edging the fanbase hardcore. This is literally Kondo playing coy with the interviewer. Since the Falcom shareholders meeting is just a few months away, this is the time we're going to hear more about upcoming sequels and probably get at least one major game for 2026 spoiled, which Kondo may have done in the interview, but I have my doubts. Again, in that interview, Kondo stated he doesn't want fans waiting as long as they did between the original Trails in the Sky and the second game, which was roughly a 2-year wait. which means Trails in the Sky Second Remake will be coming out sometime next year, but my doubts stem from this. That is an awfully short turnaround time even by Falcom standards, especially when you factor in the next Xanadu project which was announced a while back, and the fact fans have been kept waiting for Kaino Kiseki 2, which will actually move the story forward. As exciting as it is to get the Sky Trilogy remade and accessible on pretty much everything, it doesn't advance the narrative forward. It merely makes onboarding newcomers into the franchise significantly easier, which is an amazing thing. It's why I feel so strongly we'll get the Crossbell duology remade too, since that would make the gameplay in line with the vast majority of the modern titles. Having those also remade would make the onboarding process much easier. But okay, say this remake does come out next year. That makes it trickier to figure out what Falcom's going to do with their other two projects, one of which entered production around the same time as the Sky remakes obviously would have, and one a little bit beforehand. Logistically, it doesn't work. Not only is Falcom a really small developer of around 50 people, but it also puts a greater burden on any potential marketing team, as all three entries would be essentially competing against themselves, which also discounts the marketing for Trails Beyond the Horizon in the West, and any marketing surrounding East 10 Proud Nordics, which is also coming westward in the early stages of next year. That's effectively Falcom cannibalizing their own sales, which was a worry I had when it was revealed Trails Beyond the Horizon would come out around the same time as the Sky remake. So much so, I even made a video detailing why delaying Beyond was probably the best thing that could happen for the Sky remake. I've covered one issue, but there's also another one. What about the competition? Since 2026 is shaping up to be a murderer's row of games, with how many big hitters will be on offer, you'd think it was the 1927 Yankees. But seriously, with how strong the roster of games for next year is, it's going to be crowded, which puts any potential Falcom projects lower on the pecking order for many. Then when you factor in them potentially having 3 games on offer in the same year, and it just starts looking really crowded. But okay, when do I actually think we'll see the second chapter remake? So when do I actually think we'll see the second remake? While Kondo has said it'll be out next year, I outlined why I have my doubts in the previous point. I do, however, think sometime in the early stages of 2027 is well within reason. Logically, it makes the most sense to release Kaino Kiseki 2 first, since people have been waiting so damn long for it. I think that will show up sometime in late 2026, probably sometime around September, since that is when Falcom typically release their big game for the year. So I think that potentially puts Sky's second chapter remake outside of the 2026 window and makes it far more likely we get it sometime in early 2027. That would still live up to Kondo's not super long wait requirement, while also having the best of both worlds, as longtime Trails fans will get Beyond the Horizon 2 far sooner, and newcomers can continue the story with second chapter relatively quickly, which I think then puts the Xanadu project in the late 2027 to early 2028 window. So I would say that kind of gives us a potential roadmap for what we can potentially expect from Falcom for the next handful of years, with Sky third chapter potentially slotting into the mix at some stage. But when do you think we can expect the second chapter for the Sky remake? Let me know in the comments section, and maybe check out one of my previous Falcom videos. Also, remember, if you doubted me,